Hi, I'm Lisa. Welcome to my glass studio. If you're new to fusing, or even if you've been fusing quite a while, there are a lot of terms that we use all the time that may not be super familiar to you, and maybe you're wondering, what does that term mean? When is that term important to me? And, what do I need to know about glass fusing? So today I thought we'd talk about glass fusing terms for beginners. COE is a term that you hear all the time. People will say 90 COE, 96 COE. What does COE mean? Great question. COE means the coefficient of expansion. The COE in glass that we are working with for glass fusing, it's important that the COE be the same COE type of material in your project. So what that means is like 90 COE, that is the rate at which that particular family of glass, when it's heated, it'll expand at that rate, and when it cools, it'll contract at that rate. Where 96 COE will expand when it's heated, contract when it's cooled at the rate of 96. So there's basically two families of glass. There's 90 COE, 96 COE. You can make a project out of all of either one of those materials, but they're not necessarily materials you can use in the same project because they don't expand at the same rate, they don't have the same coefficient of expansion, and they don't contract at the same rate as your project cools. So the idea with the COE, the reason that that's important, and the reason that all the materials that we're working with when we're glass fusing, the compatible materials, are marked or identified or, in any kind of text or whatever you read or whenever someone's referring to it, they're talking about, COE, it's because you want to work with materials that have the same COE within the same project so that you have great success. So when those two materials, let's say the red and the blue, have the same COE, you put them together. When that glass is heated, they'll expand at the same rate, and then when they're cooled, they'll cool at the same rate. Compatible and tested compatible are other terms that we use. When we refer to those, what we're suggesting is that all the material used in a single project must be tested and compatible with each other in order to have success. So that glass will expand and contract at the same rate, which is great, and then you will avoid having breakage due to tension or stress caused in that project by having material that is not compatible. So back to compatibility and tested compatible. What we're referring to there is all the material in a single project needs to have the same COE and be tested compatible in order for you to avoid having any thermal shock, stress, or breakage. So successful projects start with working with material all of the same COE that are tested compatible. Anneal is another term that you're going to hear very frequently. So when we take glass, the firing process is taking glass from room temperature up to a process temperature or a target temperature, which I like to call it. At the target temperatures, we're going to achieve the specific results that you want. Then we take the glass from that temperature and we bring it back down to room temperature. Now, there's periods of time when glass is more sensitive to temperature change. So the annealing phase is slightly below after the target temperature. We bring the glass to that level, to that temperature, and we hold it for a period of time. When we force the glass together by fusing it, stress is created between those materials. So what we're doing is in the annealing phase is we're allowing the glass to rest or hold at a certain temperature so that that stress can be relieved, and then we slowly bring the glass back down to room temperature. Now, the annealing temperature is specific to the different manufacturers. They each have their own number that they like to use. Also, the amount of time that you use for that annealing, how long that will take, is determined by the size and thickness of your project. A tiny little project like this can anneal very quickly. A much larger project that is thicker, there's more mass, more glass, and that would take more time to anneal, so you would hold it there longer. So imagine you're taking these materials, you're forcing them together, creating stress. We want to relieve that stress, and that's called the anneal phase, or annealing, or when you anneal your glass. You just hold it for a period of time, relieve that stress, and then lower the temperature gradually back to room temperature. Annealing is really important because at that point, your glass is already fired together. You already have the beautiful piece of art. Your annealing is really important because it ensures that your project is successful when it comes out of the kiln, and long term that there's no stress in that project, and it'll be, look beautiful, be durable, and be successful and solid and whole without breakage for a really long time. Another term you'll hear frequently is controller. Controller is an automatic electric device that cycles through a predetermined number of segments in a kiln that will take glass through a series of temperatures. From the time we're taking from room temperature, it'll take it for a series of temperatures and steps called segments on the way up to the top temperature where you want to get your fusing effect, all the way back down to room temperature. Now, controllers look different, depends on the manufacturer. Some have multiple buttons, some have only a few buttons, some have an electronic keypad that, you just push, just cycle through different things. So right here is the controller on this Scott Firebox 14, and it has 3 buttons. Right now it's showing you that it's at idle and the current temperature inside the kiln. Now you hit these buttons right here and you can set up what we call firing guides or firing schedules, and this controller will automatically take that glass through all those steps from heating to the process temperature down to annealing and then back to room temperature automatically. So the advantage to using a controller is you have consistent results. If you make something and you love it, you can repeat it multiple times and get those same results. If you make something and it didn't come out great, well, you can go back to that controller and make some adjustments in order to improve your firing results on the next project. This Firebox 14 has what we call a 3-key controller, meaning it has 3 buttons. Over here, let's come on over here because I can reach this one a little bit better. This Scott clamshell kiln has a digital controller. Let's go back to home. We begin here. And then we go to programs, and then my programs. And these are all the different programs, my own personal programs that are held in storage in this kiln. So at any time I can pick a program, and then it'll show me details about that program. I can view the program. It shows me all the different segments and what's going to happen at each of those segments. And then if I'm confirmed that this is the program I want to use, I'll go back, and then I hit the start button, and now the kiln is firing, and it's showing me a graph of the process and the temperatures and the time it's going to take to achieve this particular firing program. The complexity of the controller is often consistent with the size of the kiln that you have. You can do much more complicated, larger, thicker projects in a larger kiln. So those controllers are generally a little more complex, have more bells and whistles, and have more options. Now, the smaller kilns, like this Firebox 14 has a 14-inch interior. It has a 3-key controller. You can still do 8 segments or as many segments as you want. You just have to cycle through a little bit more. It takes a little longer to put those programs in, but it does retain and hold those programs in permanent memory until you change them. This one also holds the programs in permanent memory until you change them. So don't be shy about getting something smaller with less buttons and less fancy. It still will do the same job. You'll just maybe have to take a little more time setting up, and obviously read the manufacturer's directions and get some guidance as to how to set that up to get the perfect results for your firing, your situation, and for your projects in your studio. Now, some older kilns, or kilns that are a little more basic, might have something called a pyrometer. A pyrometer, instead of having a digital controller or an electronic controller, they would have a gauge and a probe. Now, the gauge would be like a dial on the outside of the kiln that would hang from the kiln, and then there's a wire with a little tip on it that goes inside the kiln and sends a message from the inside of the kiln to that gauge and tells you what the internal temperature of the kiln is while you're firing. So if you have that type of controller, that's great. You just have to monitor it manually instead of having your firing done electronically and automatically with the controller. You can still get the same great consistent results. It's just a matter of being a little more aware of your firing schedules, a little more aware of your particular kiln, and often you'll have to stay with the kiln while it's firing because you have to be there to change the temperature if necessary. Once it gets to that top temperature, you'll have to hold it, maybe turn it down. A lot of times there's dials on those kilns instead of just the buttons. And you may have to be there in order to actually gauge and control that temperature as it changes throughout the firing process. Thermocouple, what is that and why is it important to us? Okay, maybe this is a term you don't hear all that frequently, but it is something very important to you. A thermocouple is a little probe on the inside of your kiln that relays the temperature of the inside of the kiln to the controller. So it's important to you because it gives you an idea, it helps you, oh man, now we're into that phase where I can't say anything. Okay. All right, sorry.
Keep going.
Okay. Thermocouple, what is that and why is it important to you? It may not be a phrase you hear all that often, but when you hear it, it can be like, gosh, is that related to glass fusing or why would it be? Okay, thermocouple is very important to you because it's a probe on the inside of your kiln that relays the temperature to the controller on the outside of the kiln. So you know what the temperature is at any given time inside the firing chamber as your glass is firing. So over here on this little Firebox 14, the thermocouple is right over here. This little tiny metal probe. You want to make sure you don't bump it and take good care of it because that's what relays the temperature to the controller so you know what's happening inside the kiln. Now this kiln over here, the thermocouple is located up here and it's a little bit larger. Again, when you load the glass, load your projects, you want to make sure that you don't bump that, bend it, damage it, do anything to hurt it. Years ago in kilns, they had this really long thermocouples. They were kind of difficult to work around because when you're putting your shelf in, you had to kind of tip the shelf to get it in there. And if you had a project on the shelf, well, that was no good. Sometimes your project slid right off. So now they're making a conscious effort to make those more compact. So when you load your kiln, they're less likely to get bumped. You're less likely to, adjust your glass or move your glass on your shelf, and they're less likely to get damaged. So a thermocouple is a probe inside the kiln that relays the temperature to the controller on the outside so you know what's happening inside the kiln at any given time. Firing guide. That's another term that you hear, and sometimes it's used in a broad range. So let me explain. A firing guide is a step-by-step schedule you use to fire glass of a certain size and a certain thickness to achieve a very specific result. A firing cycle is another term you might hear, and it's relating to fusing, of course. So it is the specific set of times and temperatures that the glass will experience during heating, annealing, and cooling. The firing process is not just heating. It's heating the glass from the room temperature up to the process temperature, bringing it slowly down to the anneal temperature, and then slowly back to room temperature. So the firing guide, the firing cycle, is the set of times and temperatures that the glass will experience during that firing process. Segments. Let's talk about segments. Firing guides are carried out in segments. Segments are simply the different stages or steps that glass will be taken to heat it, get the process temperature you want, the process that you're looking for, bring it down to anneal and room temperature. Now the number of segments, how many there are, will be determined by the size and thickness of your glass. Larger projects require more time, so there'll be more segments and the whole process in general will be much slower than a smaller project. So the larger and thicker the project, the more segments, and in general, the longer the firing time. Another term you'll hear frequently that kind of sounds, out of the ordinary for glass fusing is the word hold or soak. Well, what does that mean? There are often times during a firing process that we want to hold the glass at a specific temperature to make sure we achieve the desired results. And that would either be called a hold, and sometimes it's called a soak. It's not really taking the glass and, getting it wet. It's just a matter of allowing the glass to soak up that temperature so that you achieve the results you want. We will often do a hold or a soak when we're slumping glass. Once the glass gets a temperature where it'll start to sag and conform to that mold, you want to hold it there for a period of time to allow the glass to achieve that result. Then you bring the glass again slowly back to room temperature. Devitrification, also known as DVit, is another term you might hear pretty frequently and not know what it means. Devitrification is the forming of crystals on the surface of your previously shiny glass. Now that sounds like it could be very pretty. Crystals on my glass, ooh, that should be nice. But no, what it is on the surface is you have an irregular finish. Instead of being beautiful, shiny looking like glass, it looks mottled, or maybe it looks like there's a bit of a haze on there. And really the worst thing about it is it's not consistent. Now if you had a haze everywhere, maybe it would be okay. You could deal with that and it'd be all right. But a lot of times what will happen is that inconsistency, that haze, is only on certain colors, or sometimes it bridges different colors, almost like an oil slick on water, how it doesn't really have a specific shape to it or a specific purpose. It's just there, and most of the time it's undesirable and unattractive. So we want to try to avoid that. So devitrification, forming of crystals on your glass, can be caused by not cleaning your glass well enough. So the way you can avoid it is clean your glass really well. Make sure you get all the fingerprints off that surface. Make sure there's no oil residue from your cutter on the glass. Wipe that off. Once your glass is clean, handle it from the outside edge. Don't handle it this way. You'll prevent getting any more contaminants on that glass that might end up actually burning into your project, which again can be disruptive and inconsistent and therefore unattractive and unwanted. Now, if you do end up with DVit, what you can do is sandblast the surface of the piece and refire it, and hopefully, avoid that and get rid of it. Another thing you can do is, before you actually fire the glass, spray a preventative material on there that you would purchase at your art glass supplier. In the past, it was called Spray A. I'm not sure what the products are now, but there is a spray you can spray on that entire project before firing it. And what that spray does, it takes all those surface impurities and kind of floats them to the surface and disperses them. So instead of leaving a thumbprint or a residue from oil, it disperses it all over the entire glass so it's not visible and it doesn't disrupt the surface. It makes it shiny. So another option would be choose which material you're choosing. DVit tends to be more common when you're using with 90 COE. It's more common than when you're working with 96 COE. So that's another difference between those two materials. So DVit is something that's not always desirable. Sometimes it occurs, but now you know what it looks like, what the term means. A lot of times it'll just be called DVit, and you know how you can try to avoid it, and then if you do happen to have it, what you can do to remedy that piece and bring it back to its beautiful luster and shine. All right, here's the biggie: thermal shock. Gosh, that kind of sounds scary. It is, actually, it is scary. Thermal shock is breakage due to temperature change too quickly. Glass is sensitive to temperature change from room temperature to 1,000 degrees. Then you can move quickly. Then it's fine at the process temperature. Then you bring it down to the annealing temperature. That temperature is determined by the manufacturer of the specific glass you're using. And then from 1,000 degrees back to room temperature, glass is sensitive to temperature change. So between room temperature and 1,000, and then 1,000 and room temperature, we move slowly. Whether we're heating or cooling, we move slowly to avoid thermal shock. Thermal shock is temperature change too quickly. So we want to avoid that by moving slowly. Now, thermal shock shows up in a variety of different ways. You can break the glass on the way up, and that type of break will look like one thing. Or you can break it on the way down because you've cooled too quickly, or you peak in your kiln too early, which you should not do. And then that break will look a little bit different. So if you're getting breakage, it may be you need to slow your firing process down and make sure you don't look in the kiln. When it's almost cool and you can't wait and you're impatient, leave the building. Step away, don't look, wait till it reads well below room temperature before you open that kiln and take a peek, and then you'll be super happy at your results. I have a bunch of resources for you free on my website, including glass fusing terms, an entire document there that you can download and reference anytime you want. For this video, I went through there and I picked out the ones that I felt were most relevant for beginners and words and terms that are not related to other types of artwork. So I picked those out, handpicked those, and put them in an order that I felt was relevant for this particular video. Now, on my website, I have a 5-page document with a whole lot more terms, and they're all in alphabetical order, not necessarily in the order we showed here today. The ones I did today, I did in the order of what I thought was frequency you might hear, and maybe the frequency you might question, what that term was or what it meant. A lot of times, a lot of us have been fusing for a long time, and we say things, we just spit out terms that are comfortable and familiar to us that we don't realize may not be familiar to you. And that was my intention here today, was to help you feel a little more comfortable understanding these terms, and also so that you know where you can find these terms in detail and research them and have them at hand anytime you need them in the future when you're doing your firing projects. Now, today's presentation, I went ahead and made a document. This will show up in my upcoming blog, so you can go see exactly what we talked about in this video. But if you want more in-depth detail and you want the whole 5-page document, it looks like this. It's glass fusing terms. It's on my website in the free firing guides area where you can just go there. You can click on it. It downloads immediately to your device. You can print it or you just read it on your device. And you've got all this information right at your fingertips anytime you need it. Back to compatibility, I want to mention one more thing about that. All the manufacturers will have stickers or a way of identifying that their material is tested compatible. So here's a sticker we've got on this bullseye glass right here. It's a round one. Now, I'm pretty sure that my material in my studio is not really up to date with the type of sticker, the coloration, the size of all that. But just so you know, this says bullseye compatible glass right on there. And then here's a piece of Wismach, and it says tested compatible right on the label, along with the manufacturer's name and the color number. And then here's a sticker from Oceanside, and it shows that the color number and this big old sticker showing that it's tested compatible. So when you buy your material, it should be there should be some identification on it showing that it's compatible. You'll know it in the number when you order it or purchase it at a store. You'll also know it by the label on the material. And when we cut our glass up, what I do is I take a Sharpie marker and I write on there, you know, this color is 200, and it says SF, which stands for Spectrum Fusible. And I would write right on the scrap pieces 200 SF, so I know in the future that this is, the color is white in case I want to purchase more in the future and I need more of this particular color. I know what it is. And also I know that it's fusible because I have that indication on there. What I would also do on some of them is write 90 COE on this material, or I might write 96 COE on this material. So just so you know that when you buy your material, it is marked that it's tested compatible. It is marked by the manufacturer. They have some sort of identifying sticker on there, whether it looks like this or some newer version. I'm not really sure, but just so you know that that is there for you to help you identify the material and ensure that you're working with compatible materials within a single project. Thanks for joining me. I enjoyed sharing these fusing terms with you. I hope you find it helpful and it helps you navigate and encourages you to do more glass fusing. Now that you have some of these terms, you don't feel like, oh gosh, everyone knows what they're talking about, but maybe I don't. Well, now you do. And if you don't, you know where you can go find resources so that you can, educate yourself and feel more comfortable talking with other glass fusers. And when you're reading and researching things online and looking at how other people's projects and they're comparing what they're doing and how they're doing it, and someone says, hey, this happened, what happened? And they use these terms, you will be right there with them, knowing what they're talking about and more comfortable engaging in that conversation and benefiting from it and that education, that you'll get that also. So thanks so much for joining me. Please consider becoming a follower on my YouTube channel. We would love to have you. We have new videos coming out all the time, so please follow my YouTube channel and consider becoming a premium video member. We would love to have you. We have new videos coming out all the time. We have a bunch of courses, new exciting things that we're working on, and we've got resources for you, for the members there on our website that are special, and we've got these specific projects that are just for members, and ebooks and different get-togethers, things like that. So we'd love to have you. Until next time, happy fusing.